If you need a Bible, there are Bibles available at the communion tables. If you don't own one, that is our gift to you. You can keep one. Turn to the book of Judges, chapter 8, where we left off last week. My name's Lauren, one of the pastors here. What we do is go through books of the Bible. Judges right now, then we'll do the book of Ruth, and then we will head to the New Testament and tackle the book of Galatians at the first of the year. Well, how many of you have ever been disappointed in someone in leadership? Come on, it's everybody, right? Leadership at school, a coach, leadership in a church, leadership in some political figure. I mean, it's probably all of us. If you lived through COVID leadership, you were probably sad as you looked at leadership during COVID. But seriously, bad leadership. It impacts families, it hits communities, it devastates churches, hits the local area of government, the state area of government, and the national area of government. We all know that there are just bad leaders. World history shows us that there are bad world leaders. Genghis Khan, whose name means universal ruler. That's a good name for someone that's going to destroy everything, right? He said the greatest joy is to conquer one's enemies, to pursue them, to seize their property, to see their family in tears, to ride their horses, and to possess their daughters as wives. That's a bad leader right there. Like from the start, a bad leader. When you read through the kings of the Bible, you see a pretty common phrase over and over, and it goes like this: he did not walk in the ways of his father, and then he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Bad leaders were in the Old Testament, and even what we're seeing in Judges, probably more common than good ones. Maybe we feel like that sometimes. There can be some that are good leaders, though, every once in a while. Not perfect. Only Jesus is the perfect leader, but good. And what I mean by that is kind of they even start off well, and they actually limp to the finish line running their race well. They finish well. Then there are those leaders that make you just go, what in the world happened to them? What devastating event caused them to start to go a different direction? They started off what seemed like so good, so apt, so skilled, so courageous, but then somehow along the line, they just went crooked. They start well, but then they just slowly don't end well. Today, we have a beast of a chore, and we're going to have to do this a couple times in Judges because it's how it fits, but we got to tackle two chapters that highlight the rise and fall of Gideon and his family. Now, if you recall from last week, Gideon and his 300 dog soldiers had just defeated over 100,000 people using what? Their trumpets, their clay pots, and a torch, which confused the Midianite army in the middle of the night, and they ended up slaughtering each other. What was left of the Midianites were some kings and some princes and some soldiers who are now on the run from the area that they were attacking there in Israel. And now Gideon is in kind of like a hot pursuit moment. And so he sends messengers to the men of Ephraim asking them for help. They came down at the end of that chapter and they captured two princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and they killed them, we said, at a rock and at a wine press. Now, you would think this would make Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim, stoked for this victory. You'd think they'd be happy that their oppressors had been taken out, much of them in the middle of the night. But instead, what does Gideon get? It tells us there in verse 1, the men of Ephraim said to him, what is this that you have done to us, not to call us when you went to fight against Midian? And they accused him fiercely. He gets confronted by the tribe of Ephraim. So he's in pursuit. Many of their enemies are dead, and they're ticked off because Gideon didn't call them to go into the battle to where they would get great glory and great victory. I mean, it's cute, right? They wanted to be invited after the victory. That's kind of nice, right? They want the championship ring and join after they join the team, like after the championship, basically. All of Israel has been fighting and in caves for 7 years. And now Ephraim picks this time to say, why didn't you call us to battle, right? Their criticism here is born out of frustration of having missed out on the glory of this victory. What about us? Can anyone identify with kind of the hurt pride of Ephraim? Have you ever been upset that maybe you were not asked to join in on some victorious opportunity? Maybe it was work-related, sports-related, ministry-related, like you missed out on being a part of the team. It was, I believe, my 13-year-old all-star team, okay? I've been on this particular all-star team over the past several years running. Our regular season team had won the championship, so we got to send 4 players to all-stars that particular summer. I was positive I would be one of the 4. And when the coach showed up at my door, I was actually super excited. But then he began to apologize because since he was coaching, because we had won, the winning coach gets to coach all-stars, he chose to bring his own son, batted like 8th, was horrible in the field, instead of picking me, and he just wanted to apologize to me in person. So I was out. That team went on to be a game shy of heading to the national championship. That whole summer, I was just flat out angry. My pride was hurt. I felt left out, overlooked. So in some sense, I get what Ephraim is saying here. It's like, hey, we wanted a piece of that. Like, we wanted a piece of that glory. Now, maybe we are not in that camp, but maybe you feel a little bit like Gideon. Have you ever been accused of being in leadership and not including someone into that particular group? If you've led, if you lead, you will be accused of this. Here he is on the back end of this battle. They were up all night. Now they're running all over Israel. They literally did what God said in getting the army down to 300. Gideon did that. They win this battle, and the people of Ephraim are not happy with them, and they're ready to pick apart the decision-making of Gideon. Welcome to leadership right there. Like, we as a church, man, I just got to take a step back. I mean, it's crazy. Robert was just saying at the door, can you believe it's only been like 6 months since the mandates were lifted? But we navigated the last couple years as best we could, like just seeking the Lord and his word to the best degree that we could. But at times, it felt like, honestly, as a leadership, you couldn't win. Anybody that was in leadership, I was talking to a friend of mine up at Packcrest. He's a PE coach up there. He's like, bro, he's like, being a teacher, our industry, you being a pastor, like, I cannot fathom just anyone in leadership could not win. Some felt left out. Some felt unheard. Some didn't like the moves we would make. Some wanted us to be more political. And I've said over and over, if you were in leadership the past 2 years, not only was it hard to find a win, but many are not in leadership now. Many. I think I've told you guys this, just a number of just pastoral friends went on sabbatical this year, which is what I did, and a good percentage aren't coming back. They're just not coming back. Now, their statement does reveal a couple things. First, that God was absolutely correct to say that Israel would want to boast against him. Remember, that was the whole point? Get it down to the 300 dog lickers, right? Get it down to just those guys. Those guys that were like probably the smallest of the small when it finally came down to it, because that's kind of how God works. He uses those things that are super foolish to confound the wise. That's what Corinthians tells us. God knew that a group was going to say, I got the victory. Look at what I did. and glorify themselves in victory. See, Ephraim wanted a piece of that glory, and that was the point here. God was absolutely right. They were a big tribe, and I'm going to say this and make note of it. They were a very wealthy tribe, very wealthy. And do you remember who was from this tribe? Joshua. So honestly, they got some big warrior sandals to kind of fill, right? I mean, they got a big hitter in their particular group. And now little Gideon from little Manasseh did this. And yet the truth is, we know God did this. Second thing is that Ephraim was invited. If they were invited, they would not have respected Gideon as a judge later on. There's no way. They don't respect him even of this victory right here. So now the question is Gideon's being confronted about his leadership style. What is Gideon going to do right here? The Bible tells us, it says in verse 2, and he said to them, what have I done now in comparison with you? Oh, little flattery there, Gideon. Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer, which is his family? God has given into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, these two princes. What have I been able to do in comparison with you? Then their anger against him subsided when he said this. Gideon's response to this is either flattery, you could probably go that route, or it's just very diplomatic as a leader, maybe both. He's like, you guys are awesome. What have I done in comparison to you? You taking out these princes, all I did was blow a trumpet and bang a pot. Like, that's all I did. You guys are absolutely amazing. So he praises them, and they're satisfied. Now, we might want at this point to praise Gideon a little bit for his diplomacy here, but we will find out Gideon isn't going to be so kind to his other countrymen in Israel. Something starts to go wrong in Gideon's heart. Check this out. Verse 4. And Gideon, who's on the run, right? He's pursuing like 15,000 guys. Gideon came to the Jordan, crossed over, he and the 300 men, so they're still with him, which means they also didn't lose anybody in battle, who were with him, exhausted, he's tired, yet pursuing. So he said to the men of Sukkoth, please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I'm pursuing, he knows who he's going after, two kings, Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. And the officials of Sukkoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand? In other words, you already have them? That we should give bread to your army. So what happens? Gideon said, well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will flail your flesh with thorns of the wilderness and with briars. Uh-oh. Gideon's starting to get a little temper here, right? He's getting a little hangry as he's coming at these guys right here. He's exhausted from the pursuit of these Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. And Gideon asked this town to simply just feed his men. Just give us some bread. They refuse to help, which is absolutely annoying. Like the Ephraimites, they show a complete lack of gratitude to Gideon for defeating their enemy. Basically, they're like, you finish the job or no soup for you. That's basically what they just told them. Why? Well, they know that if Gideon isn't able to catch and kill those leaders, then what's going to happen with the Midianites? They're going to regroup. They're going to return, right? And they're going to kill any of the people that were seen as helping Gideon in the pursuit of them. So Gideon, he's a little upset right now, and he's like, okay, you don't want to help me now? Then once I get those two kings, those princes into my hand, I'm going to tear your flesh with the desert thorns and with briars. All right? You guys don't like me? I'm coming back with vengeance, right? He's terminating them in a moment here. And it says in verse 8, it says, and from there he went to Penuel and spoke to them in the same way. And the men of Penuel answered, as the men of Sukkoth had answered. And then he says to the men of Penuel, now remember, these are all Israelites. When I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. Apparently they had all held up in a tower. They're yelling down to him. He's yelling back up at them. He's ticked off. Another town won't help him in this spot. So he moves to Penuel and he lets them know he's going to strike them down. He feels at this point, Gideon, he feels that he ought to be receiving some admiration and a little bit of honor for what he's done. Just give me a little bit of respect and a little bit of food. Gideon's anger at the people of Sukkoth and Peniel shows that he expects to now be given a little bit of glory, to be given a little bit of respect for his achievements, which he is forgetting were in fact God's to begin with. Well, we're going to fly here. Verse 10. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, which is, okay, check this out. That is like 150 miles away from where this battle first began. So he's been pursuing on foot from like Eugene to Bend, just about. Okay, so just picture that in your head. With their army, about 15,000 men, all who were left of all the army of the people of the east, for there had fallen 120,000 who drew the sword. And Gideon went up by the way of the tent dwellers east of Nobah and Jogdabah, that's a fun one, and attacked the army, for the army felt secure. And Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and he threw all the army into a panic. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres, and he captured a young man of Sukkoth, okay? So he's done his job. He's got the princes. He hasn't killed them yet. He's now coming back to the towns that he had just threatened. And it says when he comes to Sukkoth, he captures a man, questions him, and he wrote down for him the officials and the elders of Sukkoth, 77 men. And he came to the men of Sukkoth and said, behold, I have Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are exhausted? And he took the elders of the city, and he took thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them taught the men of Sukkoth a lesson. That's a bad day in the Bible. And he broke down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the city. Then he says, after he's done all this, got his revenge on the people of Israel, then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, where are the men whom you killed at Tabor? They answered, as you are, so were they. This is going to be very important. Every one of them resembled the son of a king. And he said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you. So he said to Jether, his firstborn, rise and kill them. But the young man did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a young man. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took, interesting, the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. Gideon, who himself doubted God, needed the loving care of God to get him into battle. The angel of the Lord showing up over and over, caring for him, being gracious to him. Gideon, who himself doubted, is now not showing the same kind of grace to these towns. Instead, he says, you doubt me? I'll show you my strength, and I'll teach you a lesson. And so when he has returned from again routing a far stronger force with his 300 men in that place of Karkor, he captures Zebah and Zalmunna, drags them along with him, comes back to these towns, which are Israel, to fulfill his promise to them. He grabs a guy, and he discovers the names of the elders in the town. He reminds them that you taunted me. He teaches them a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars, which they would rip along their backs, and then they would drag them through the city. And then to Sukkoth, that's what he does to Sukkoth. Then in Peniel, things get even worse. He literally pulls down the tower and killed the men of the town. How did he pull it down? I don't know. Would have been difficult. Maybe donkeys. So at Sukkoth, right, he's whipping them, then he's tearing down the tower with these donkeys. He's got the whip and nay that's going on right there. Now, that's bad. Now, verse 18 puts a new twist on kind of this whole story. It really does. And you almost need to read verse 18 and 19 and then go back to the original call of where Gideon was, because it might help you understand, first and foremost, why Gideon was hiding in a wine press to begin with. We learned that these Midianite kings had come through recently into Gideon's town and had killed not just his brothers, because you could say that Israel were his brothers, but it says the sons of my mother. These were literally his brothers, and that their deaths are what have made him now so determined to catch them. And perhaps what made him get more and more extreme as he's getting hungrier and hungrier on his way to get them. Gideon is out for blood vengeance. That's what he is doing here, and for the honor of his family. This is why Gideon asked Jether, his oldest son, just a boy, to kill them. He wants to humiliate these kings by having them killed by a mere boy. In the end, Gideon performs the execution himself, and with their deaths, the victory is complete. Now, I wish I could say that the story was over right here, and Gideon just kind of ruled as judge in Israel, and it said Israel had peace for 40 years, and then Gideon died. But this story isn't over. Gideon is about to believe his own press. He's about to believe his own hype on who he is. The Midianites said, hey, all of your brothers are just like you. They were kind of like kings. And notice what he took there in verse 21. He took some crescent ornaments. These were likely idolatrous things that would have been around those camels. So he's got these gold crescents now. He's like Sir Mix-a-Lot. He's got gold, right? He's got a lot of bling, and he's going to get more. This brother, though, is stepping up. And he's saying, I did this. These things are mine. Watch what happens. Verse 22. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the land, or from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said to them, he's going to speak this with his lips, but he's not going to speak with his actions. Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. Sweet. Stop right there. Period. Done. Go live your life, Gideon. But then Gideon said to them, let me make a request of you. Every one of you, give me the earrings from his spoil. For they had golden earrings, because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, we will willingly give them. And they spread a cloak, and every man threw in it the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. He's got his drip. Besides the crescent ornaments, and the pendants, and the purple garments, that was for Garrett, worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the collars that were around the necks of their camels. And Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city in Ophrah, and all Israel, listen, whored after it there. And it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. So Midian was subdued before the people of Israel, and they raised their heads no more, and the land had rest for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Jerubbaal, who was also Gideon, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon, check this out, had 70 sons. Brother got busy. His own offspring, for he had many wives. And not only did he need wives, his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he called his name Abimelech. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died in a good old age and was buried in the tomb of Joash, his father, of Ophrah, of the Abiezrites. And as soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. And the people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of all their enemies on every side. And they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. Now, at first, kind of starts off, ain't so bad. It starts off kind of good. They come in and they're like, Gideon, we want you to be the king. Me, he says, and my son and my family will not rule over you. Awesome. Just stay there, Gideon. Like just be in that space. But those are the words of a politician. I'm not going to rule over you. His actions showed differently. Give me the earrings of the Ishmaelite. Apparently, Ishmael's got a lot of bling. So now he wants more gold for the spoil. You know what we call that in kingdoms? We call that taxes. That's kingly. Next, he now has a harem of 70 sons. We don't even know how many daughters. I mean, you just do the math on that. Brother had to have like 15, 20 wives. That's what rulers and kings did, especially rulers and kings in the land of Canaan. This is once again the Canaanization of Israel. Then he names a son of a concubine. I mean, he's got guts here. Do you know what Abimelech's name means? My dad's the king. That's what Abimelech means. Finally, Gideon makes an ephod. Now, an ephod, it was the vest worn by the high priest into the presence of God. And when he would go in with requests, with questions of God on behalf of the people, and it would light up in such a way that the priest would be able to interpret it as to what they were supposed to do. Now, the ephod, per God's instructions, was only to be worn by the tribe of Levi. And in the tabernacle, Gideon creates his own version of that Israel, the Bible says, whored after. Similar how they whored after other gods. This has reminders all over it of the repetitious story of Israel. But if you go back into Exodus, somebody else collected some gold earrings, made a calf that poof just popped out of the fire, is what he says. And that's Aaron the priest. He may not be trying to openly deny God. He isn't with his lips. But he puts himself in the place of God. He takes upon himself the privileges of God and is now directing people's attention away from God. What a mess. He's acting like a king. And check this out. He also wants to be a priest, being the mediator between God and man. And I'm going to tell you right now, we know this. There's only one king priest, and that's Jesus. This is a fake. This is a phony right here. What in the world happened to Gideon? What's going on? His victory evidently gave him a taste of glory, and that leads him to blasphemy because he's forgotten God. And he becomes literally a curse to Israel. So now instead of being the deliverer, he's the stumbler. Instead of pointing people to God, he's pointing people to himself because he forgets God, which is always, we see this over and over. It's the downfall of judges. It's the downfall of our own heart. It's what happens when Monday morning hits, right? Every Sunday we're reminded of God, trying not to forget God, reminded of his grace and his goodness. Then Monday hits, and that kind of goes out the window. With Gideon, we see something that we have never seen also before the other judges. The people are actually whoring after an idol during his reign. They're beginning to fall away before Gideon's even gone, right? So how did he get here? A couple points for you, just to think through. Because anybody in leadership can get here. This scares the crap out of me. It does, as a leader. As a pastor, because I've seen too many guys roll this way, and too many guys that sat and watched other roll this way, and then they ended up rolling that way as well. So as a leader, as a pastor, this thing freaks me out. There's a couple instances in Judges where it just absolutely freaks me out. This is one of those areas. How did he get here? First, success can be really dangerous. Gideon's need for respect and honor and his response when he doesn't get it shows that his success in battle has been the worst thing for his heart. He's become addicted to it, right? Dependent upon his success. Success can easily cause us to forget God's grace because we think it's our success. Just can. Because our hearts are so desperate to believe that we can actually save ourselves. And we can't. The only reason I get to be a pastor is because of God's grace. It's because of his glory. It's because of his giftings. It's the only reason I get to do what I do. Success can be dangerous. Number 2. How often was Gideon talking to God in chapter 6 and 7? You think about it. When Brad taught chapter 6, we hit chapter 7 last week. Man, angel of the Lord be showing up all the time. Gideon's afraid. He's calling out to God. God's meeting him. God's answering him. When Gideon was fearful and intimidated, he couldn't help but be relying on God. However, once he got the small taste of victory, Gideon talks about God. Gideon ain't talking to God. You think about that. I got it. I've got my victory. I've had more victories. I got this. I don't need God, right? God is not even mentioned as showing up here. Third, who are Gideon's counselors? Who is Gideon's community? With Gideon now, it's I don't need to consult with anyone, not even Jesus. He is on an island thinking that he knows the answers and they're stupid. Make an idol, have people come to him, hear from God. Proverbs 18:1 says, whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against sound judgment. Fourth, he becomes abusive to his own people. I mean, I get it. He's supposed to pursue, take out Midian. That was his task. He's got a mission. But now, anyone, including the people he was fighting for, which is Israel, that doesn't help him, except for rich Ephraim. I mean, he might need their bling in a little bit, right? He needs the rich people. But anyone that is not on his mission is getting in his way of his desires, and he steamrolls them, and there are bodies everywhere. Just bodies behind him, this leader. And in all this, he feels the need to be rewarded. So he takes money from the enemies. Then he takes money from his own men. Leaders, listen, who think they are big will want to live big. Leaders who think that they are glorious will want to reveal that they live gloriously. Sixth, he makes his name so great that he gets to speak for God. You needed to come to Gideon now with his ephod to hear from God. He loves the attention he has from speaking God's voice. It's one thing if it's just Gideon, but man, the people of Israel, and he's not just leading them, he's leading his family, as we're going to see here in a moment down this path. Now watch this. Don't fall asleep on me, because here we go. We got to tell the horrendous story of what happens to his family, then we're going to circle back around and land this plane. It says, chapter 9, Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, Gideon, went to Shechem, to his mother's relatives, and said to them and to the whole clan of his mother's family. Now remember, mom's a concubine, not part of Gideon's, the rest of Gideon's family. He's got half-brothers. Say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you? Oh, they are ruling, sounds like. Or that one rule over you. Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf on the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal Berith, with which Abimelech hired, I love this phrase, worthless and reckless fellows who followed him. And he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbabel, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbabel, was left, for he had hid himself. And all the leaders of Shechem came together, and all Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar at Shechem. Now Jotham, he's got a little parable to tell his brother. When it was told to Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim, and he cried aloud and said to them, listen to me, you leaders of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went out to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, shall I leave my abundance by which gods and men are honored and go to hold sway over the trees? And the trees said to the fig tree, you come and reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit and go to hold sway over the trees? And the trees said to the vine, you come and reign over us. But the vine said to them, shall I leave my wine that cheers God and men and go to hold sway over the trees? Then all the trees said to the bramble, the tumbleweed, you come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. Now therefore, if you acted in good faith and integrity, that you made Abimelech king, and if you have dealt with Jerubbabel and his house, and have done to him as his deeds deserve, for my father, Gideon, fought for you and risked his life and delivered you from the hand of Midian, and you have risen up against my father's house today, and have killed his sons 70 men on the stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the leaders of Shechem, because he is your relative. If you then have acted in good faith and integrity with Jerubbabel and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come and from Abimelech devour the leaders of Shechem, and let fire come out from the leaders of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled and went to Beer, it's Bentown, and lived there because of Abimelech, his brother. You're still with me? Good. Abimelech ruled over Israel for 3 years, and God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. And the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbabel might come, and their blood be laid at Abimelech their brother, who killed them. Justice is coming. And on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. And the leaders of Shechem put men in ambush against him on the mountaintops, and they robbed all who passed by them along the way. And it was told to Abimelech. And Gaal, son of Ebed, moved into Shechem with his relatives. The leaders of Shechem put their confidence in him. And they went out into the field. They gathered grapes from the vineyards and trod them and held festival. And they went into the house of their God, not God, and ate and drank and reviled Abimelech. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, who is Abimelech? And who are we of Shechem that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbabel? It is not Zebul, his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him? Oh, it's coming back. Would that the people were under my hand. Then I would remove Abimelech. I would say to Abimelech, increase your army and come out. And when Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled, and he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, behold, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his relatives have come to Shechem, and they were stirring up the city against you. Now therefore, go by night, and the people who are with you set an ambush in the field. In the morning, as soon as the sun is up, rise early, rush upon the city, and when he and the people who are with you come out and against you, you may do to them as your hand finds to do. Abimelech, all the men who were with him rose up by night, set an ambush against Shechem in 4 companies. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the gate, the city, and Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from the ambush. This is an epic battle, just so you know, okay? This is a big deal. A big moment is about to happen. Picture like a Lord of the Rings battle. It's some fortress that's going to take place. That's where we're going with this. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, look, people are coming down from the mountaintops. And Zebul said to him, you mistake the shadow of the mountains for men. Uh-oh. Gaal spoke again and said, "Look, people are coming down from the center of the land, and one company is coming from the direction of the diviner's oak." Then Zebul said to him, "Where is your mouth now, you who said, 'Who is Abimelech, that we should serve him?' Are not these the people whom you despise? Go out now and fight with them." And Gaal went out, and the head of the leaders of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him. And many fell wounded upon the entrance of the gate. And Abimelech lived at Arumah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his relatives so that they could not dwell at Shechem. Whew. On the following day, the people went out in the field, and Abimelech was told. He took his people and divided them into 3 companies and set an ambush in the fields, and he looked and saw the people coming out of the city. So he rose against them and killed them. Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, while the 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the field and killed them. And Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He captured the city, and he killed the people who were in it, just like his dad. He razed the city and sowed it with salt. And when all the leaders of the tower of Shechem heard of it, they entered the stronghold of the house of El-Berith. Abimelech was told that all the leaders of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. And Abimelech went up Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bundle of brushwood, took it up, he laid it on his shoulder. And he said to the men who were with him, "What you have seen me do, hurry and do as I have done." So every one of them, people, cut down his bramble, following Abimelech, put it against the stronghold, and they set it to the stronghold on fire, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem also died. Sound familiar? At a tower, more people die, 1,000 men and 1,000 women. Then Abimelech went to Thebez and camped against Thebez, captured it, but there was a strong tower within that city. And all the men and women and all the leaders of that city fled to it and shut themselves in. They went up to the roof of the tower, and Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it, drew near to the door of the tower to burn it with fire. And a certain woman threw an upper millstone, that's a kitchen appliance, on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. He called quickly to the young man, his armor bearer, and said, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest they say of me, 'A woman killed him.'" We're still saying it today, buddy. And his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, everyone departed to his home. Thus God returned the evil of Abimelech, which he committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers. And God also made all the evil of the men of Shechem return on their heads, and upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. That is the longest chapter I've ever read here. What is going on, right? Well, there's a big theme. We're not going to delve into it today, but you can look at it yourself, and that is God ultimately gets justice. Like we're like, he's just getting away with all this? No, he's going to get justice. You don't even see God's name really mentioned in it, but he's going to get justice. God gets justice. But until this chapter, there has been a familiar sequence of events. Israel forgets God, they sin, there's oppression, they cry out, a judge is raised up, there is victory, and a season of peace. But now there's been a departure from that sequence of that sin cycle that we've seen over and over. Abimelech is Gideon's son by his concubine who lived in Shechem. Now, this means that from his birth, he had been an outsider in this family of 70 other brothers, right? Now, unlike Gideon's other 70 sons, he was illegitimate to an inheritance. But he has a name. My dad's the king. He's got a name. And as the story unfolds, we see a man who feels that whatever he will get out of life, he's going to have to take it for himself. I mean, with 70 brothers, you're just trying to go to the dinner table. You're fighting for that, right? And you're the half brother from not mom, right? You're the concubine. He hired a bunch of worthless and reckless fellows to be his gang. They ambushed and killed 69 of Gideon's sons, except for Jotham, who escapes by hiding. Then Abimelech said, "Well, I guess I have to be king now, since my dad is gone and there's no sons left." And the leaders of Israel, who knew all of this, crowned him as king at Shechem. Now, when we say king, don't think like big ruler. Think more like tribal ruler in that particular day. But the point is, this is a terrible scandal. First of all, as I told you, they were not supposed to have a king. Like, Israel's not supposed to have a king. Who's supposed to be their king? It's God, right? God was supposed to be their king. Second, they've chosen a brother-murdering scoundrel to be their king, which happens a lot in world history if you kind of look it through. And to top it off, this all goes down at Shechem, which is a holy place for the Jews. It was the birthplace of their nation where God had given Abraham the promise of Messiah. And it had been renewed with Joshua. Well, Jotham, the one brother who escaped, comes out of hiding, gets in front of Israel's leaders, tells them a parable about a bunch of trees in a forest who decide they want to choose a king. The olive tree they come to, that olive tree says, no, I don't want to be a king. I don't want to leave this. I'm getting too rich off my olive production to be bothered with being your ruler. Same with the figs, same with the grapevine. Nobody wanted to be the king. Eventually, they find the tumbleweed. Will you be our king? This is Abimelech. Sure, but first you have to burn down all the other trees. And then Jotham says to the leaders of Shechem, this is what you've done. Now in the parable, it is an implicit criticism of Gideon's other sons as well. Evidently, there might have been some good ones in there. Maybe they could have ruled singularly pretty well, but they didn't want to leave their life of ease to serve Israel. Where did they get that? Well, Gideon hadn't modeled for them a life of using power and wealth and serving others very well. But Jotham's main critique of Israel's leaders for anointing an obviously worthless, selfish goon to lead them, Jotham says, this is going to come back to you. And it did. Abimelech turns out to be a terrible leader. We see all the chaos of his reign. Eventually, all of those leaders in Shechem that anointed him revolt against him, which you get what you started. Like, he's just receiving back the way that he started his ministry, what he built upon. He built upon death and murder, and guess what? That's coming all the way back around till finally he gets to this space and he ends up getting killed by a kitchen appliance from a lady from a tower. He got what he deserved, right? Millstone on his head. Here is Gideon's legacy. Let's circle back. Where poor decisions, pride, and the craving of power, man, they decimated his family. Just blew it up. And now he's dead. Justice is served. And it's sad. This story is the first one in Judges where the actual oppression comes not from outside Israel, but from within. It is one of their own, Abimelech, their own people, the son of one of the greatest leaders that is their oppressor, which means that it's not simply, listen, it's not simply the foreign nations that are Israel's problem. Your problem is not just what's out there. They are their own problem. Their hearts are their own issue. In fact, think about this. There really is no special outpouring even of God's judgment in the story. No fire from the sky. God just allowed them to experience the results of their own sinful choices, which he does with all peoples and all nations. Sin is its own curse. It comes with its own set of consequences. Our sin, not God, ends up becoming a curse to our family and our kids and the people around us. This should cause every leader, every Christian leader, every pastor, whoever, to stop and pause and do what Ice Cube said. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. You got to do it. I mean, how often have you seen this? This is church history, and we are almost done here. I need you to hear this. This is church history in repetition in both the Big C church and smaller churches, in networks, in groups, in denomination. God calls a man that is gifted by God. That man, with his giftings, helps a ministry grow. As it grows, it ends up growing into a movement of God because God ends up working, which is great. Those are good years. Years that feel a little bit maybe like revival is happening. And if you've been in a church or denomination that is growing and working and moving, you get that experience. But then the man or the movement starts to believe their own press. They get prideful. They think, look at what I've done, like Nebuchadnezzar. Pretty awesome, right? They forget about the fear and hiding in the wine press before they started the movement. They forget about seeking God personally and hearing from him and having his leading. They forget about his great victory. They desire the golden crescents and the earrings and the money that comes from the spoils of war. And as they believe their own press, they think people come to me to hear from God. People need me. And to keep it going, because they're not talking to God anymore, to keep it going, they build mechanisms, the machine, to just keep the ministry moving. And out of the mechanism, there is a need then for a monument, something to be built that shows my victory and my voice. But listen, God will not let us and our monuments get the glory. He shares that with no person. What happens is that movement, it's all over church history, becomes a mess of a mausoleum filled with old, dead memories of what God did way back then. Filled with old, dead messes that were made. And just as there was a sin cycle in Judges and our lives, there can also be in the ministry of the church, in our own hearts. So does the church just die? Well, you're here, aren't you? That should answer the question. Does it just look like Europe, where we walk through these vast, empty churches as a part of a European walking tour with no people? Except for those that are taking pictures of the great architecture? Is there any hope? Of course. Because God doesn't need the man. He doesn't need me. He keeps working to spite us. Chapter 10, he raises up Tola. He judges Israel for 23 years. He judges he brings up Jair. He judged Israel for 22 years. It said that guy had 30 donkeys. He must have been something special. I don't even know if you can call that horsepower or not. Israel didn't even ask for it this time. They didn't cry out. Abimelech just gets hit with the kitchen appliance, and then God's like, okay, we need some more judges here. We got a problem. Why? Because it's not about us. It's not about our prayers. God is going to save despite us, because he truly is kind and compassionate and knows what we need before we even do. And all of this is pointing to the King Judge Jesus we didn't ask for. But God made a promise when our first parents fell. And he kept that promise to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Israel, and then to all the world, that he was coming as the better king priest. And Jesus, unlike Gideon, he had every right to demand service as king when he came. Every right. And unlike Gideon, he rightfully wears the ephod because he is the tabernacle of God's presence on earth. But unlike Gideon, Jesus successfully resisted the temptation to rule in power over the nations. In Matthew chapter 4, when he was offered it by Satan, Jesus said, man shall not live by bread alone, by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Until the very end of his life, Jesus maintained that he did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many, not to take. He didn't take our treasures to make a garment of gold for himself. He poured out his blood to clothe us in his righteousness and to give us a seat at his table forever. He's different than Abimelech because his dad really is the king. And unlike the trees of the forest who were too self-interested to rule, Jesus was more than willing to be your good shepherd. But then we chopped him down and we killed him. Yet he didn't burn us to the ground in his anger. He didn't come back with vengeance. He willingly took the fire of God's judgment upon himself to love us and to save us. The millstone of God's judgment was dropped on his head for us. Your desire for a better leader is found in Christ, where you have been offended by leaders, and you will be. Where you as a leader have offended. Who fell? Jesus didn't. And when you as a leader fall, do you know where you fall? Into the arms of Christ. Because Gideon, I know that because Gideon, this man who didn't end well, brother ends up in Hebrews chapter 11 in the hall of faith. How can that be? How can he be set forth as this amazing example? We look at his life, it's a freaking train wreck. Because of grace. And that's what the blood of Jesus does. Father, today we thank you for your kindness towards us, and that while we were yet sinners, you died for us. You've pursued us, you've loved us. And for that, we stand in praise to you. We come and receive from you. There is a healthy fear in leading and in ministry that we need to hear from you. God, keep us humble, which means we need to not be forgetful of the glorious gospel of Jesus. We love you, Lord, as we sang earlier. Now we come and dine. In Jesus' name, amen. This time, you can come to the tables. You can receive the great gift that Jesus has for you. And this is how I know you get to be in the impenetrable fortress of Jesus Christ. There's all these towers in the story that keep getting knocked down. Guess what? When you're in Christ, it doesn't get knocked down. He's too strong. He holds you too well. He will never leave you or forsake you. You come and you partake at this table. You can confess if you want to. He's received that. And he says, you're forgiven. So come to the table, come and dine, partake of him. If you desire to give, there's boxes at the table. Let's sing now.